So now it is my pleasure and my honor to turn it over to the incomparable MC for tonight, Emil Sher. He is beloved by every member of this community. He is one of the founders of this community. He was at the very first living room meeting. Emil is a playwright and an author, and as he refers to himself, a schlepper for the DJC. I would say a schlepper extraordinaire. Thank you for leading us through tonight, Emil.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Amir, for the introduction that my late mother could have written. And you talk about leading us. I want to begin by talking about the ending. At the end of today's gathering, Lisa and Danny are going to sing Shechachianu, and tell me, Rabbi Amir, is it fair to say a translation would mean we are so joyous, so happy to have reached this place? Does that work?
In gratitude for being enlivened, sustained, and reaching this moment.
Exactly. So on that note, I cannot begin but by a huge, full-armed, full-throated shout out to Paul Axelrod and Karen Robbins, because we simply would not have reached this place were it not for those two. I spend my days with words, and I was actually thinking that at times of profound sorrow and profound joy, I'm often at a loss for words. And in this case, honestly, I just can't find the words to describe. Well, I came up with two actually to describe what Paul and Karen have done. It's not only that they've worked tirelessly to have gotten us to this place on this book, but they have done it with grace and generosity. And that, you don't often see that. You can work tirelessly and at the expense of a lot of other people. And I just want to begin by thanking them from the bottom of my heart. And I know I'm speaking from the bottom of our collective heart. True to the spirit of the DJC, we want to keep things informal, relaxed, comfortable, inclusive, and welcoming. So I'm going to keep things rolling along, but I did want to have a bit of an introduction. And I'm going to start by talking about Marie Kondo. And you're thinking, Marie Kondo, DJC, is her real name Marie Kondowitz? What don't I know about this woman? I don't know much about Marie Kondo either, but I know decluttering is sort of her name to fame. So on decluttering, so many of you know I'm married. I have the great fortune of being married to Kathy Miller, who's the DJC administrator. And lately we've been doing some decluttering. Our girls have moved out of the house. We are going through boxes that have been unopened literally probably for a decade. So we're going through, and I mentioned now, what are we finding? Drawings and artwork from our daughters who are now 25 and almost 28. Sophie's almost 28, Molly's 25. And I mention them because I actually write of them in my chapter in the book, and I have strict instructions from Karen. We have to push the book at every turn. So if you want to learn more about Sophie and Molly, how Sophie, at our first gathering, before we were the DJC, it was like, let's put the word out, let's find out who's going to show up. We had an Onyx Shabbat in the basement of the Herndale room of Eastminster, and Sophie was 2.5 and bit a stranger, the same stranger, twice on a leg. And I'm thinking, so much for being a welcoming community. And Molly was 6 weeks old. So Molly is 25, as is the DJC. And I often refer to my children and Paul's daughter, Caitlin, Karen's boys, as children of the DJC, and Ezzy and Charlie, as they are, as I say, children of the DJC, the next generation, if you will. So we're going through these drawings and all the stuff that we're familiar with. By the way, not only as parents, not all of us are parents, but we all have parents. So in a similar position where you have a parent who may have been in the same home for 50 years, moving somewhere else, you go through the boxes. And to me, it's not about the what. I'm more sentimental than Kathy. So, how many finger paintings do you keep? How many letters from camp do you keep? It's not about the what, it's about the why. Why do we why do we feel moved to hang on to one of the finger paintings? Hang on to the lumpy volcano, hang on to the report card, the little ribbon they got in grade 6 for being, fastest, whatever. We hang on because it tells us this is who they were. And in order to understand who they are today, my 25-year-old and my almost 28-year-old, it really, really helps to know who they once were when they were 3 and that little drawing they made, and 5 and 7 and 9. And that, in a sense, is what this book is all about. It shows us, if you want to understand who the DJC is today, it's not as if my daughters or the DJC just dropped from the sky. And to really have a great understanding and appreciation of who we are today, it really helps to know who were we when we were 1 and 5 and 7 and 9. That's what this book does. And it really, really does help. So really, that's the spirit in which I think the book was created. I'm going to interview Paul shortly. He'll tell us more. But I just think for those who have been with us for a long time, whether from the very beginning, 20 years ago, or 2 months ago, this book has value. Because if you've been with us for a long time, it will rekindle memories. And if this is new to you, then again, you look at the roadmap. Where has this community been? And that's, of course, we'll know where we're heading to. So that's my little Marie Kondo spiel. And the other thing I just want to mention is we're at this generational turning point. As I say, the children of the DJC are going to really shape us for the next 25 years. And if you feel that the wind at our back, we're going to be hearing from Diane Weiss for the first time, an executive director. So we are growing, we are moving forward, but that wind at the back is the past 25 years. And that's what's moving us forward. And that's what we're going to sort of unpack tonight. But I was thinking how, it's 25 years, I can't believe it, holy good, but I was 40, like, oh my God. Anyway, I'm not going to go on and on. I was 37, which is like mind-blowing. But my point being, when you get older, one of the great things about getting older, maybe as a community, certainly individually, you probably care less. You're less self-conscious, if you will. And I made a decision. I didn't consult anybody, but I know I will have consensus here that I want to dedicate this book launch to the memory of Claudia Bally, who isn't with us. She is, we talk about the DJC was born in a living room. It was born in the living room of Claudia and Jacob Bally. And Claudia was not just the name, she was intricately involved with the beginnings, the foundations, building up the DJC. And it's heartbreaking that she's not here to have seen this book. This book is of her. It is for her, as I say, and her spirit is with us today. But I absolutely wanted to, as I say, dedicate it. And I love this phrase, may her memory be a blessing. At the same time, I referenced this living room. And we were talking earlier before I was gathering with Paul and Karen and Diane. And I've said this before, but some of you may know David Wyman. For years, he designed our high holiday cards. And he says the beginnings of the DJC, and particularly that living room, was like Woodstock. Because Danny, you'd know, which song was it? Like by the time we got to Woodstock, we were 500,000 strong. Well, I'm convinced there's probably at least 10 million people who would put their hand on the Bible and said, I was at Woodstock too. Same thing with the DJC. To the point was, and this is such a Jewish story, but it's true. I was talking with Paul and Karen, and we couldn't have a page of saying, these were the people who founded the DJC. And I know there's some familiar faces who were there in that living room that day, probably a dozen to 15 people, I would say, inside Claudia and Jacob's house. But to hear people talk, they didn't live in a house, they lived in a coliseum. Dozens and dozens of people said they were there. And so we got to the point we thought it's too risky to say these people were here because some will be so miffed and they'll just leave. And so in the end, we couldn't put down the names of the founders because it's still up for debate. So we left it at that, but I thought that's so Jewish somehow. I was there, I wasn't there. It's like that. One of my late mother's favorite jokes was this old Jewish man in a restaurant looking at the menu, and he asked his wife, do I like this? And it's almost the same thing. Was I there? I think you weren't there, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I will end on that, as I say. And so it's not even so much who was there then, but who's here now. And that's why I think that's a fitting note to begin our discussion about this wonderful book and celebrating who we are today. And not about the dozen people that live in, but the many, many, as I say, the community that we are today. So I'm going to begin by talking with Paul, as you see, one of the driving forces with Karen behind this book. By way of introduction, I asked each of today, the contributors who we're going to hear from today, to give me a moment. I said, can you share a DJC moment, however you define that moment to be? And Paul talked about, and this is so fitting, how he helped organize the 18th birthday party for the DJC, which is high, at Leaside Arena, which has since changed. And he talks about how there was no skating involved, but the party was a blast. And I love this line, it felt like a high school prom. I just love that. You think about a prom, that sort of, that nervousness, you're self-conscious, did we make it? Not sure, what next, where you going? I thought it was such a perfect analogy. And this I love, we should do it again ASAP. And so I'm thinking, okay, again, well, maybe 36, double high, we'll have another little celebration. But on that note, I'm going to, Paul, you are muted, great. I'm going to begin, as I say, Paul was the driving force, with a very simple question to talk about the origins of the book, how it came about.
Well, thank you, Emil. I'm a historian, a retired academic historian by trade. And as an occupational hazard, I tend to look at things through an historical lens. About 3 years ago, maybe more, I realized that the DJC was no longer the new Jewish kid on the block. It was more than 2 decades old, and it was time for its story to be recorded. There are histories of Jews in Canada and of Jews in Toronto, and the DJC should find its place in that record. And that really was the motivation.
Now, here's a question that all authors and editors, people who create a book, dread. What's the purpose? Why? Can you sort of
Well,
the bigger one? I know there's a missing gap.
Yeah.
You always have to justify it.
All right, well, I'm going to try. So let me tell you what the book is not. It's not a comprehensive history of the DJC. That's something that should be done. But the book certainly is a celebration of the DJC. I wanted it, though, to be more than that. I wanted to answer 3 substantive questions. What is the DJC? Where did it come from? And why does it matter to its members? And I think it does that.
I love that. And keep with the Jewish tradition of always the questioning. Not that we have the answers necessarily, but I think it speaks to this ongoing questions. And I do think, to our credit, we are constantly asking ourselves, questioning ourselves as a community. So I just want to throw that little plug in. Can you talk about the nuts and bolts? I mentioned Karen working with you together as a team, this wonderful pair. Could you tell us about the nuts and bolts of putting the book together?
Well, I talked to a number of people, including Karen Robbins, who initially offered to help with the book as a researcher. But before long, it was evident to me that she should have a much greater role. Everyone who's worked with Karen understands that on every project, she both gets the big picture and is master of all the details. I mean, she's running this Zoom show, so, I rest my case. She joined me as a co-editor, and it's been such a great privilege to work with her, and in such an entirely collaborative way. So Karen, thank you. What we did is that we invited several individuals to prepare what we referred to as core chapters for the book. I wrote the first chapter, attempting to put the DJC in historical context. And as another occupational hazard, mine is the only chapter with footnotes. So sorry. Emil wrote a compelling chapter on the founding of the DJC, taking us into the room where it all happened. Josh Greenhut did something very creative. He interviewed all the former and current board chairs and provided a narrative of the DJC's history through their eyes. Elise Rich writes insightfully about the educational and B'nai Mitzvah programs, which have been so critical to the life of the DJC. Karen Robbins and Evelyn Stein recount the important outreach and multi-faith work that they've participated in and actually inspired over the years. Rabbi Miriam writes movingly and elegantly about the theological and spiritual values of the DJC. And finally, Avram Jacobson pulls it all together by identifying 5 formative principles of the DJC, including my favorite, ruthlessness, something he insists is a word, and I'm not going to question him on that. So that's the substance of the chapters of the book.
I'm concerned if ever we're accused of being ruthless, it could sound like ruthless, and that's just so at odds with who we are. But I love that phrase. The ruthless is a very good word. One of the pillars you talk about the 5 formative principles is inclusivity, and that can be really it takes work to be inclusive, right? I don't think it's a natural impulse, if you will. How did you go about trying to weave in? We have so many. Again, one of our strengths is our disparate voices. We are not monolithic. We are many, many different threads of Judaism, if you will, woven together into this, I think, singular community. How did you go about trying to include not as many voices as you could, but how did you go about, casting a wider net and to bring those voices in?
Yeah, so, in addition to the chapters that I mentioned, there are about 40 vignettes in the book. These are personal and poignant and humorous and very meaningful. We asked people, and people offered to write, 200 of their best words. And I see a number of the authors in the squares. So that's how we brought in, I think, a representative series of voices within the DJC. And then there are some special features in the book, including one on the arts and another one on the Syrian refugee project. But there are other aspects to that diversity of voices, and you'll have to buy the book to read about it. And what I'd like to do, I guess, just at the end of my talk here, Emil, is I want to thank, special thanks to all of the contributors to the book, to the board, especially Kathy Glazer, with whom I worked closely, to Rick Wilkes for his sage publishing advice, and to Jacob Bally, the book designer, whom Karen will say more about now. So thank you.
And on that note as well, we're fortunate to have two readers, two people who have contributed vignettes to the story, will be joining us very shortly. But before then, I just want to introduce the wonderful, inimitable, incomparable, I don't know what we do with other, if we have the spirit of the DJC, I think Karen Robbins lives. Karen, you have to unscreen, let's see your punim here, please. Yeah, she's just like the heart and soul. I mean, it's big-hearted doesn't begin to describe this woman. Look at the smile. I mean, just constantly
Come on, right back at you. This is too embarrassing.
Anyway, she's just, and her whole family, okay. Michael and the boys. Anyway, I want to bear with me here. Karen's moment. Remember I talked about a DJC moment? And she described sitting for the first time in Eastminster Sanctuary, and you look and covered by stained glass, right? Like we are in a church. And she remembered, as many of us did, traveling through Europe was it probably your 20s, Karen? Is that fair to say? Seeing these beautiful cathedrals and churches, probably never imagining that this Jewish girl from Toronto would be sitting on a pew surrounded by stained glass, davening. Like, wait a minute, what's this about? This, what's wrong with this picture? Well, there was nothing wrong with it. And that's what Karen felt. She said, what would it feel like? What would it look like? Said it surprised her how it felt like a show. And we've always said it's not about the bricks and mortars, it's about the people. People like Karen Robbins, dare I say, and Jacob, we're going to meet in a moment. She said, I love this. Being in the sanctuary felt Hamisha and familiar, but also new. Who knew? So we talk about her Hamisha, maybe because of lots of people, we have lots of, is it mention is the plural for mention? I'm not sure. But we have lots of, I think, mention, I just made it up, in our community, beginning with the wonderful Karen Robbins, who's going to introduce another mention who couldn't be with us here today, but has been interviewed by Karen.
Thank you so much, Emil. I'm just so sort of gobsmacked here. Anyhow, it's lovely to be here, and I had the pleasure. It's unfortunate that Jacob couldn't join us in person tonight. He's actually out of the country. He's on a trip with his son, which is lovely. He very much wanted to be here, but I had the opportunity to interview him on Zoom about his role as the designer of the book. And he is one of the founders. It was in his and Claudia, his late wife Claudia's living room where everyone joined. And it was an incredible honor and also gift and lots of fun for Paul and I to work with him. We were an interesting triumvirate, let me just say. Our skill sets are so different. And so I just want to show, this is around, it's less than 5 minutes, but I had this lovely opportunity to interview him. So just 1 minute.
This is no ordinary project in many ways, because when I approach design, I typically do it in a very objective way. But this project had no objectivity, in a sense that it was very deeply personal. It really caught me off guard to realize that it was the 25th anniversary. The last time I worked on something, it was when we did the bar mitzvah, the 13-year anniversary thing. And that seemed like yesterday. It's like, wow, we've been there 25 years already. First of all, I wanted to honor the intent of the book. So I had to be very familiarize myself thoroughly. So when I originally had a chance to review the first drafts of what was to be the book, I noticed that there was obviously a very formal part of it. We were documenting, after all, 25 years. of the DJC. But I sense that it still lacked the informal quality of the early stages of the DJC. And having been a member of the DJC from the early stages, what I did as a designer, as I was trying to portray the whole package, the whole history of the DJC from the early stages to the 25-year anniversary. So there were 8 chapters in total, and very different in content and style. Each either outlining a part of a history of the DJC or the values that comprise the DJC. I wanted to basically summarize all of what was said in the chapter visually by way of imagery. So each chapter has a collage page that visually tells the whole story to the reader. So everything's included there as far as I'm concerned. What I also found really interesting, and perhaps the most interesting part about the book, there was a number of vignettes, more informal writings by 40 people that tell their very individual story, how the DJC came to be part of their lives, a meaningful part of their lives. And every story was deeply personal and deeply unique. And I wrestled with how I was going to bring the individual nature of these stories, these very personal stories. I decided to exemplify the unique nature of this by way of color. So I took the liberty to color every person the way I visualize them. Every single person had different colors, very unique. And that's how I think I managed to bring that individual nature of this vignettes, these articles. It was quite a challenge to know what images to bring into the book and to be as comprehensive as possible. And we did not have a comprehensive collection of all the photographs of the members. So that was quite a challenge. So we opted to basically include pictures through the chapters that were not comprehensive, but try to be more inclusive with whatever we had. And we decided to bring that to the collage at the back of the book. I think it was really important to bring the sense of community in the book, to make everybody feel included. There was a very meaningful chapter that I thought was one of the most challenging parts of the designing of the book, that was intended to honor all of the people that have become part of the DJC and that have contributed to the making of the DJC, which is what the book is all about. I think that's one of the most successful pages in the book, because it brings everything about community, and it's hard to describe. I guess you just have to get the book to see that.
Karen, was that Karen, of course, is too modest to let us know. That was beautiful that she stitched that. Not only did she interview Jacob, she stitched that whole video together. That's her professional pursuit as well. But just, was that harp music at the end? What was it scored with?
Oh, I should have mentioned, this is music from Brian Katz, who is also from our community, who's a wonderful musician and composer, and has gifted a bunch of songs we've used in a lot of our videos. And so to thank Brian, thank you for reminding me for that beautiful piece of music.
See, and all these little threads, and Brian performed, as I mentioned, our 2 daughters, 2.5 and 6 weeks old, when the DJC began. He was there when they each had their bat mitzvah, playing music in the background. So all these little overlapping threads. We've talked, Paula talked about these beautiful, beautiful vignettes, the voices of the DJC. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Nadja Burton. I know Karen, and then thank God Karen's around, because I'd be like looking forever trying to find Nadja, where are you? Like I'd be lost in the Zoom forest. So we will have Nadja. Here she is. Nadja, first I'll share her moment. She talks about what she loves about the DJC is how we strive to be I love these words, vital, radical, and alternative voice in Toronto's diverse Jewish community. She loves that we strive. I love that not that we're there yet, but this constant strive to stand alongside our Muslim and Black and Indigenous sibling communities when they are hurting and grieving, because she knows in her heart and theirs that they would do the same for us. Nadja, is it fair? Can I say you run the midwifery program at U of T? Is that a fair? No. How would you describe your position?
Yeah, I'm a sociologist and I'm a prof at Ryerson, otherwise known as X University, and I have taught in the midwifery program for the last 25 years.
I knew there was a midwifery connection.
I'm not a midwife, just saying.
Okay, but there's a midwife, but you have to allow a little creative wiggle room here, because if I was pregnant and I was going to have a kid, I'd want Nadja as my midwife. Meaning she is just anyone who's had time to be in the same room as Nadja. Two words that come to mind are calm and centered. She's not a chaotic person. She is grounded, and I say she is one of she's been around for a long, long time, and she has spoken. She has addressed the community during high holiday services, and she's going to share an excerpt from her vignette. If you want to hear the whole vignette, buy the book, and her vignette is called "Making Room." Nadja.
Thanks, Emil. Making room. I arrive at the Danforth Jewish Circle looking for a Jewish school for my sons, Lanya and Misha. My two prerequisites are that it be progressive and downtown. In the end, the DJC lands in my lap, not because of its inclusive approach to Judaism, but because its Jewish school is on Thursday afternoons. No Sunday morning, sixth day of school for us. It's the inclusive part that snags me and makes me stay. The part that makes space for so many of us who feel estranged from more traditional Jewish spaces. In a kavanah I give at the high holidays, I talk about my boys' insistence that they are half Jewish. For my young sons, to be half Jewish is to express their love for their non-Jewish parents, to name him as half of who they are. The DJC stretches and expands and makes room for us. At my son's bar mitzvahs, I request that my partner also be called up to the bima. Two sons, two different rabbis. Each time the DJC stretches and expands and makes room for us. So many of us have been strangers in our Jewish world because we're queer or have commitments to cultures and communities beyond our Jewish one, because we are poor or because we are half. That sometimes means that we have a bit of God-phobic and prayer-adverse and resistance to anything too religious. But our strangeness also drives us to radical inclusiveness. We will not let our spouses, our half-Jewish children, our complex families be anything but fulsome partners as we create community and a cultural and spiritual home. We have forged an identity at the DJC. I am in love with the kindness, big-heartedness, and openness of this community, and grateful to its founders for knowing to make this space.
Radical inclusiveness is, I think, just a beautiful phrase. Thank you, Nadja, for that. We are going to the wonderful Elise Rich. Now, Elise, again, talk about, she's like Karen. We have a few Energizer bunnies in our community, and Elise is another one. Just does not stop. 3 kids. Anyway, just a wonderful energy. I just want to read her little moment. She talked about, Elise, if I'm not mistaken, was the education office in the Herndale basement at one point. You had a room in the basement. Is that right? Did you have it? Was there a room?
We've been all over the church.
Right, exactly. No, I'm talking about wandering Jews. But she talks about the time where, just try to picture, they had to take an ark from this little cramped office into the sanctuary. It was probably like the Marx Brothers, teetering, falling, losing their balance, finally gets into the sanctuary. And here I just want to read from her DJC moment, the quiet of setting up, so full of hope. And this was the B'nai Mitzvah program, that this thing we were all building together would truly work out. And then the great burst of joy from the students and 600 of their nearest and dearest, as it really did work out. And they really did rise to the occasion of becoming Jewish adults in the community we were creating with them. And I can speak personally, I love that expression, speaking for myself, like who else is going to speak for me? To me, one of the most joyous gatherings is the B'nai. If you haven't had the chance, I urge you to attend a B'nai Mitzvah ceremony, because, anytime you go to a bar bat mitzvah, there's kvelling, of course, understandably. This is like kvelapalooza. I mean, you have like 10 families, like it's kvelling times 10. It's unbelievable, and it's profoundly moving. And the kids have spent a year together, I think usually every Sunday. And that's my little segue into this remarkable woman. At least, when there's the Super Bowl, I think it costs like $5 million for a 30-second commercial. So I'm going to give you a bit more than 30 seconds. But if you had to sell our program, what would be the selling points of our school to somebody who said, listen, I'm thinking of coming over?
I often sell our school. I would say that a major goal of all of our educational programming is that students come out with a firm sense of Jewish identity. Even if they haven't totally worked out what that is yet, they understand what it means to be Jewish, to be part of a community, the responsibilities of being in a community, and that they feel joy about it, that those are good feelings to them, because I think cultivating joy in relationship to identity is what keeps people, or keeps them coming back, keeps them connected. What else would I say about our community? I always talk about how inclusive our community is, in exactly the ways that I have learned from Nadia Burton and so many people here who have mentored me as I've grown with the DJC. I've been around now for 14 years. And so I always talk about how inclusive our community is. And a lot of the times parents come to me with a lot of trepidation about places that they've felt unwelcome because of who their family is. And it brings me joy to be able to tell them that I don't think they'll feel like that here. And that we grow and expand, as Nadia says, to include all the people. So I don't know, does that sell it sufficiently for you?
Just a little nod to the beautiful B'nai program.
A nod to the B'nai Mitzvah program. That program is like, it's a bit of my baby. I think that's why I went to it first when you asked me for a moment. But for people who don't know, we have a group B'nai Mitzvah program. You can still have an individual bar B'nai Mitzvah, but we have a group program, and it does meet every Sunday. And I think it's such a beautiful experience for students who are involved in it to go through this rite of passage as a group. It emphasizes all the values that we feel about community, to go through that as a community. And I think it's just for most students, it's such a beautiful experience, and it gives them a built-in social group. And now that we have a teen program, it gives them people that they will know when they hopefully continue to stay connected.
And I will mention, I'm not going to go into names, but a daughter of a good friend of mine was one of the teaching assistants. Very often kids who go to the school end up helping teachers in classrooms. And she's now, I think 2021, she's studying out of town, but very involved, actively involved in Jewish life at the university where she is. And that's absolutely tied to her experience at the school. So I just want a little shout out for the seeds you're planting. Thank you. We are going to have, I'm just checking schedule, yes, another vignette with James Rolfe. And when I think of James, I think James represents many in our community, by which I mean he's modest. And people wouldn't know, to meet James, that he is he's a very, very accomplished composer. There he is. See, he doesn't even look like a composer. No, he does. And that's a very good little segue into what he's going to read. He's going to read a beautiful piece. I just want to put the title here, How I Came to Chant Torah. But before that, I want to share, and it relates to music as well, James's DJC moment. And he says there were many, but he finally chose on, he says, opening up the gates last Yom Kippur for the evening Neila service in the DJC studio. You may recall, of course, it was all Danny and Lisa were there with James's wife, Juliet Palmer, a duet with Juliet and Danny and Reed on guitars, and Lisa and Rabbi Miriam grooving along. After a year and a half of not being able to sing together, it was overwhelming. Well, I can also tell you, it was not only overwhelming for people in the room, but for those of us who had the great fortune of being part of that event. So James is going to share, as I say, almost the entire, he had an excerpt from How I Came to Chant Torah. James.
Thanks, Emil. You're very kind. So yeah, my vignette, my mother's family can trace the roots back for many generations to Jews in Germany, Austria, Poland, and Russia. But myself, I was raised with zero cultural or religious awareness of my Jewishness. In 2015, my daughter, Miriam Palmer, chose to do the B'nai Mitzvah class at the DJC. The experience of participating in Jewish rituals and holy days with her prompted in me an intense emotional response, most of all through the music, which often brought me to tears. I had never heard anything like it. I began to learn more about Jewish ritual and Judaism largely thanks to such DJC offerings as the Ritual Leadership Training, Jewish Meditation Circle, and Radical Wisdom workshops. Everything was new to me, yet somehow it spoke to me. When Alan Gottlieb offered his course in Torah chanting, I jumped in, not without some trepidation at having to learn Hebrew from scratch. I began chanting Torah every day, and soon I became attached to chanting as a daily ritual, working through each weekly Torah parsha. For me, chanting makes Torah come alive. I get to know more deeply the many twists and turns of its incredible stories, prayers, and ethics, and I feel connected to the ancestors I had never known, who knew these same words so intimately and chanted them to the very same melodies every day, just as I do now.
Beautiful. And if had I done my homework, I would say, what a natural segue to go from Elise talking about the B'nai program, and then James hearing his daughter at the program, and how that, is it fair to say it transformed your life, James?
Yeah, absolutely. It added something I had never expected to encounter, actually. I didn't grow up religiously at all, and I was skeptical, as my parents were, and it just was not a factor. And now there's just another dimension to my life.
So maybe another little catchphrase should be like, for the DJC, Judaism, it's never too late. I'm just thinking of ways of just trying to sell our community to the ones who need to know more about us.
Yes.
Talk about a salesperson. If we have a new salesperson, if you will. We talk about growing. I talk about the generation, the children of the DJC being the first generation, Lador Vador, from generation to the next generation. We have the wind at our back in terms of the past 25 years, and we have an executive director who has been involved for ages. I mean, again, you talk about community. I was at Shayna's bat mitzvah way back in the day. It was just, anyway, we have a beautiful community, and Diane Weiss has been part of that community. Actually, how do you pronounce your last name, Diane? This is important. You have to unmute yourself. There we go. How do you pronounce your last name? Weiss or Wise?
Wise.
Right, exactly. So perfect little intro. I mean, this is like, talk about a gift from above. And we know it, right? Like an ornithologist named James Bird, a construction worker named Larry Hammer. I mean, it happens. And who do we have here? Diane Weiss. Seriously, coincidence? I think not. Could have been like Diane Dim Light Bulb. It wasn't. It's Diane Weiss. And she has this, again, I think one of the strengths of our community is this, I talk about the modesty, like James's modesty. You wouldn't know the gifted composer he is. And Diane just has, I keep going back to this centeredness, a wisdom. She listens. Rosie Abella, did she recently retire from the Supreme Court? Diane could be a Supreme Court judge. Just thoughtful. She absorbs, no rush to judgment. Really, it's a blessing and a gift that not only that we've had her and Larry, her husband, Larry Till, Shane and Abby have been with us since birth, basically, but she's going to help guide us in the years ahead. So on that note, little segue again, I'm going to hand it over to Diane.
Thank you for that, Emil. I think you're all going to help guide me in this role, but really, really pleased to be here. And one of my first duties is to hawk the book. I was told that at every point we have to tell people how to order the book. So just a reminder that if you go to the DJC website, you'll find a link where you can order this beautiful book, copy for yourself. And it really is, everyone who has looked at it just gets absorbed in the content of it. And you've heard some of the compelling stories tonight. So I promise you're going to love it. I'll give you a money back guarantee. But really, another thing I want to do is thank you, Emil, for being such a fantastic host and really an embodiment of what the DJC is all about. You and your whole family, Kathy and Sophie and Molly, have been stalwarts of the DJC and are always so warm and welcoming to everyone who comes through our doors. And tonight is just, we've been able to see just a little bit more of that. And you really helped place us in this moment at the beginning when you talked about really not, I don't think intentionally, but you demonstrated the inclusivity of our organization when you talked about being, you know, that this night is both, and this book are both for people who've been around a long time to look back and get nostalgic, and for people who are just new here to really come to understand where we've come from. So thank you very much for that, and hosting us this evening. And speaking of hosting, the DJC is going to be hosting a number of anniversary events over the course of this year. In May, we're going to have a party. So COVID willing, we are planning an anniversary celebration, and you'll learn more of that about it in January. We'll send you a hold the date so that you can plan your spring calendar accordingly. And we have, as Rabbi Miriam mentioned right at the beginning, I don't know if everyone was on, but Leah Gold is our artist in residence for this year. She is going to be leading us through a whole process in exploring art and environment and who we are, and it's going to be fabulous. And it all starts with an artist talk on Wednesday night. Again, more details on the website about how to join that. And we'll have lots more opportunities to celebrate, hopefully in person, but to celebrate the amazing and supportive community that my family and I have found this to be, and we'll hope for lots more exciting and spiritually uplifting and musically enchanting opportunities to be together, whether it be live or on Zoom. And perhaps even we'll find maybe a 25-year-old scotch to taste together and celebrate our 25th too. So lots coming. Anyway, thanks, Emil.
Thank you. I just want to, again, because Karen keeps sending me these, she doesn't, but I'm pretending she's sending me these messages saying, push the book, push the book, push the book. And I mentioned it because I want to pick up on that thread where, and thank you very much, Dan, for that lovely little tribute to Kathy and Sophie and Molly, my family. But in my little chapter where I mentioned them, I talk about how, and this is true, one of the most gratifying feelings for me is during the high holiday services, I'm often in the second row next to Kathy where the choir sits, and I turn around and I see many, many familiar faces, people I've known literally for decades, and I find that very comforting. And then I keep looking around, and there are many, many faces I don't recognize, and I find that very comforting. And it speaks to, I think, this, I call it the necessity of newness. The only way we are going to survive the next 25 years if we keep drawing new people. And the old ones, well, I'm getting creaky anyways. I'm going to have to move to the back because, you know, it's hard to stand up for too long, but I digress. And I forgot, and then I thought, oh, why? I forgot to do the little moment, the DJC moment that Diane shared. And I thought, oh, I know why. I think subconsciously, because it was almost painful. And when she sent it, she emailed it to me, and I shared it with Kathy. We were both in tears. I'm going to read it first person voice. This is Diane's, and then I'm going to share Lisa's and Danny's. Diane's, my moment, bursting into tears when I saw a non-Jewish colleague who I barely knew standing outside of Eastminster with many others, holding candles to guide our way and protect us as we came to Shabbat service after the Philadelphia synagogue massacre. And I remember that well, profoundly, profoundly moved. Lisa Kent, because Lisa and Danny are going to lead us in song in a moment. My beloved, beautiful Lisa Kent, our first group Aliyah, and every year seeing people sharing talasim, enfolding us all, some raised above our heads like a canopy, standing up and standing together in our desire to be and do better. And then Danny, I love how Danny changed a little bit. He said, the light bulb moment, which I love, the light bulb moment for me, when I realized I was in a group with wildly disparate relationships to the concepts of God and religion, with whom I connected so deeply. Lucky indeed. And I think, here's talk about memory, seriously. Like, I don't think I gave mine. Did I share my? I don't think I gave my DJC moment. This is a perfect segue. Mine was, and I don't know what year it was. It was the year, every year Danny and Lisa sing Misha Berach. You know, they stand on the beam. It's profoundly moving, a song of healing. And one year Lisa had lost her voice, not entirely, but it was like, I don't know if you want to call it scratch. She struggled. That's the word I used. She struggled to sing. And you would think, oh, that's either a liability or an asset. Well, the DJC, it was an asset, because to hear the struggle made the song, which is beautiful to begin with, even that much more beautiful and layered and meaningful. And I will never forget that moment. Perfect segue to Danny and Lisa. Talk about pillars. I mean, you know, if they ever moved out of Riverdale, it goes back to Avram, roofless. Maybe we should be lucky we're roofless, because the roof would have collapsed if they weren't with us. But anyway, the beautiful, beautiful Danny and Lisa are going to sing a song. I'll hand it over to them.
I love finding new music, new compositions, and melodies from around the world to bring to our community. For Rabbi Miriam and myself, it's deeply meaningful. Sometimes I think, well, what is my favorite prayer? And it's usually the newest one that I'm working on. In this case, Anim Zmirot, which is a liturgical poem written in the 12th century that speaks of the longing of our souls to connect to our source and to know the paths within that mystery. The beginning translates, I shall sing sweet songs, and the music was composed by Rabbi Josh Warshawski.
Beautiful or what? Danny, can you remind me, Danny, do you play during the high holiday services, do you start playing Osei Shalom after the Amida? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I start playing it at
the reason why I mentioned that, because I thought I just checked and I have enough reward points with the DJC. I can redeem one more DJC moment. And I just want to mention that because one of my most favorite moments is exactly that. We have the silence of the Amida, and then you just start to play the opening chords, so say Shalom, and it stays with you. It's one of the most profoundly beautiful moments for me in the service. It's beautiful. So now, I think we have to, is Rabbi Miriam around? I hope she is. She hasn't left the room, has she, like Elvis? She's our Elvis.
I never leave the room.
Exactly. I need Rabbi Miriam. Here's why. What I'm going to ask her to do is to share 2 DJC moments. And I mentioned her generosity of spirit, I know she'll agree that if you deke out and miss one of them, that's why I wanted to share 2, to go get some schnapps or a drink, because we want to have l'chaim. We want to have something to raise your glass, right? So Miriam, you won't be offended if somebody dekes out and misses one, but comes back for the second, or stays for the first, dekes out for the second, whatever. How's that? So I'm giving you time. Rabbi Miriam, she was spontaneous. We'll share 2 moments. And this gives you the opportunity, if you haven't yet done so, I have my Manischewitz, because we're going to have a l'chaim to the community. Rabbi Miriam, over to you.
So one that just came to mind right now, our B'nai Mitzvah students and families come to Shabbat morning services. So this is not a, ecstatic moment, Rosh Hashanah, or the B'nai Mitzvah ceremonies. This is a Shabbat morning service. And the Torah portion that I was teaching about, that we were reading in the Torah, was Parshat Truma, which is the building of the Mishkan, this tabernacle, where the 10 Commandments are kept, the broken 10 Commandments and the whole 10 Commandments. And I was looking at the students' faces. I love our B'nai Mitzvah students. They're engaged and bored in the most beautiful ways. And I looked at our ark and I said, I have an idea. B'nai Mitzvah students, come up here. We took the 2 Torahs out of the ark and 2 different people held them. And I tipped our ark this way. And that's what the Mishkan looked like. And I had the B'nai Mitzvah students gather around it and hold it. And the procession around the community went from awkward students sort of walking because they're told to walk behind the Torah to they were carrying the Mishkan, the wilderness tabernacle. And it was just this beautiful, spontaneous moment of creative ritual and interaction. And that moment was a profound joy. So that's one. To choose another moment. Right now, my mind goes to Yom Kippur this year, and getting to sing in the sanctuary in the new NUUC, Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Sanctuary. So there we are in the space of our multi-faith hub. So beautiful, renovated space. Being there with Lisa and Danny and Reed, and all of you, the community on the screen, we had a beautiful big screen so we could see your faces, and feeling both the ache of this pandemic moment and singing so fully and soulfully, I think has been one of the highlights for me.
And a perfect segue to another collective song.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. You know it, sing with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן
Perfect way to end. Raise the schnapps, the Kool-Aid, the chocolate milk. And we say, again, l'chaim. Let's all say.
L'chaim, unmute. Everyone can unmute.
Yes.
L'chaim.
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 Woohoo! Woohoo!
Now I think, where's Karen? Because I think Karen was, do we want to moderate? Do we want to have a little feedback? And Paul, do you want to maybe moderate, or?
If people have any comments, observations, questions, want to take 5 minutes to ask anything about the book, feel free.
I wanted to say something. So, I mean, in addition to sort of getting the history of the DJC, what's so nice about the book is also finding out the histories from each individual. And, you know, reading Paul's story and Emil's story and Karen's story and everybody that's contributed. You know, I think I know so many of you fairly well, and then learning things about you guys that I knew nothing about. And, you know, Paul, I did not know that you went to Hebrew school 4 days a week and Sundays as well, and things like that. That was kind of cool.
I never recovered.
Thank you for everybody's contributions.
I had a question anyway for Paul and Karen. So I'm curious, when you did your deep dive into all the submissions that came in, into chatting with people, did your sense of the DJC evolve at all? And what was your main takeaway, you know, after having kind of witnessed this grand survey of kind of the stalwarts of the membership? Did your ideas, did your perceptions change in any way, or just deepen?
I think in my case deepened, just to see the different ways in which people have connected to the DJC, and that like I suspected that, but in the elegant and articulate ways people wrote about it, it was quite meaningful. Karen?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it also gave me a feel for, I think Emil referenced this, like some of us that have been around a long time. It helped me feel the continuity between members who have been there from the beginning and the newer members. And what to read the experience of, I totally enjoyed reading about the people I've known, and our families have grown up together in the DJC, but it was also a delight to read about the newer members' experiences. And I really got a feeling of how we've evolved. Like, I really felt it reading so many different things together, and it's wonderful. And I want to thank you, Rick, too. I know Paul thanked you, but Rick was like our consultant on all things publishing, and it was very much appreciated.
Well, my great pleasure, and congratulations on a masterful piece of work. So we're all thrilled.
Okay.
I'd just like to thank Paul and Karen, and also Jacob Bally, for the monumental amount of work on a volunteer basis that you put into this. It's just incredible, and it was so eye-opening to me to read about the history and all of the chairs of the board of directors and all the different voices. And like Evelyn said, I learned things about people that I never knew, people that I thought I knew relatively well, and it was just a joy, and it was a labor of love, obviously. And I just want to thank you so much. We are so lucky to have this book.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. I want to thank you, Emil. You did an amazing job.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You know, when you love something, it comes easy.